Hi, this is Fuzz Face Reviews, and today we'll be getting into the newest supernatural show set in Victorian London, The Nevers. Oh, wait, hold on.
Okay, well, alright, thank you for telling me. Alright, thank you. So I've been told on some very good authority to stay very far away from that one. Today we're going to be looking at the Irregulars. Now, if you like this video, please leave a like, share, subscribe, and that's about it, right? Okay, where was I? Netflix's latest supernatural mystery series follows a group of misfits that investigate a series of supernatural crimes of Victorian London for Dr. John Watson and his associate, Sherlock Holmes. Yes, you heard that right. It is probably one of the most bonkers ideas put together, and by God, it could have been better. There are some things that work with the show, but there are also more things that just don't seem to work well. Specifically, the Sherlock parts. But we'll get to that. Now let's get on with the video.
Now, some would think on face value that this show would be in a PG-13 rating, seeing as it does focus on the adventures of young misfits in Victorian London, with a dash of fantasy mystery, of course. But much like the actual London in the Victorian era, this show can get pretty dark and gritty at a moment's notice. Like, Jesus Christ, it can get pretty violent at times. I'm talking someone getting their eyes plucked out by ravens in the first episode violent. Sheesh. And that's a good thing. It does complement well with the story and shows us the levels of danger that the characters can face. The pacing of the show is a mixed bag though. For one thing, it doesn't feel dull on the slower sections, and once things get fast, it's at a digestible pace for you to process all that's happening. Now, it does start off a bit slow. I mean, approaching the first supernatural cases in a sort of monster of the week trope that sometimes feels like filler. Although, these episodes do allow us to engage more with the characters and their motivations going forward. The production design is something to be admired at the very least. I mean, no surprise, as most shows or films set in old London tend to always be very close in accuracy and depiction. There is an obvious effort to make sure that the majority of the locations are different and unique to one another, and does tend to go towards the execution of transporting you to a different world. Not like that goddamn live action Winx show that looks dull and uninspired in a lot of aspects of design and trying to make things look like they're in a different world but just end up failing. Seriously, I get they were going for a more realistic approach, but god you know you f***ed up when your set looks more like the Xavier School for Mutants than an Academy for Fairies. But I digress. So our main cast of misfits do fall into typical character archetypes. You have the tough leader with Bea, the weird one being Jesse, Billy as the muscle, Spike as the wisecracking heart of the group, and Leo who's the know-it-all nerd. Wait, is it just me or does this guy look a little bit like James McAvoy? What's great about these characters is that they have such great chemistry with one another, and there is hardly ever a time when a character would feel left out or out of place in the show. You do get to see how and why they're so important in the grand scheme of things. Honestly, this is probably the best presentation of a young group who has one psychic dealing with the supernatural in a Netflix production. And oh yes, I think they have better character than the kids in Stranger Things. Now hold on, before y'all go apeshit on my opinion.
Talk about it though, let's figure it out. Don't judge me, let me explain.
See, with the kids of Stranger Things, a lot of them don't get much of a story arc at times throughout a season, specifically after season 1. Sometimes you'd focus more on Eleven, or Steve, Mike, Nancy, etc. And the rest would just tend to be pushed aside for the most part while getting some story beats sprinkled here and there, only to have a major payoff come the final 2 episodes. And that's not to say that it's bad writing, it just makes you ask if these characters are really needed and not just being dragged into shenanigans. In the Irregulars, it never felt like anyone got the short end of the stick. Sure, majority of the time there's more of a focus on Bea, Jesse, and Leo, but there's a good chunk of time for development for every single one of them. They all have full-fledged arcs from the beginning of the show all the way to the end. That being said, this is still the first season, so that could change when the second season comes around, if there is a second season.
With all that being said, you have to ask yourself, where exactly does the show really fail? A lot of aspects, but one of the prime reasons is, well, Sherlock. Before we get to that, I think we have to look deeper into how they manage the story, because That's probably the weakest part of this show.
To clarify, I know how I said that the main characters do have decent enough stories and arcs. That's true. But that's separate from the main plot of the show, which is just a wonky mess of motivations and execution. I know earlier I mentioned the pacing to be a mixed bag where things are digestible, but it takes time to actually get some steam going. In terms of the main plot, it takes at least 3 episodes before we get some proper footing to the route of the bigger picture. And as we get to the focus of the show, things just start to collapse and rush in as fast as possible. Doesn't help as well with how plot twists come by without any proper setup. Hell, there are hints or sections that set something up, at some point you'd already guess the obvious outcome. And with how things play out, especially in terms of motivations and reveals, it falls flat in its face when you get to who the villain of the show is, if there ever really was one to begin with. It has a lot of plot threads and tropes that you have seen in a lot of other things, all blended together in an almost uninspired presentation. Seriously, the show even has its own magical black character trope. Let me explain. The magical black character trope is a supporting stock character in fiction who, by use of special insight or powers, often of a supernatural or quasi-mystical nature, helps the white protagonist get out of trouble. Best example of this would be in the works of Stephen King, specifically in The Stand, The Green Mile, and most famously in The Shining. The show follows more of the latter, where the character of Jesse is mentored by another character with psychic abilities who just so happens to be a black person. Now, I may be getting ahead of myself, I may be trying to reach around for something, but after seeing this sort of thing done also in Sabrina, you do notice a pattern. And speaking of deductions, let's finally get into the biggest problem with the show. When I first heard about this show and the concept, I said to myself, the fuck? As far as I know, Sherlock Holmes has dabbled with supernatural cases before, but then again there was always a realistic explanation. Here though, it's straight up supernatural, magic, voodoo, all that Harry Potter, Sabrina, Mary Poppins bullshit. But here's the point I'm getting to. The show has an identity crisis. Alright, it is 2 shows mixed together. On one hand, you have a show about a group of kids being hired by a mysterious employer to investigate cases that deal with the supernatural, who would then eventually discover the secrets of the one that hired them and the imminent threat. On the other side, you have a show based on the works of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, where John Watson hires a group of kids to investigate cases that he and his partner Sherlock Holmes cannot fully comprehend. You get the idea? Either one of those would be an already interesting show if done on their own, without having to merge the 2 ideas. And I do understand that the concept is a big pull for audiences to get into the show, which is then rectified in a way by the finale. It still presents a lot of distraction. A lot of times you'd find yourself questioning the idea of what kind of show this wants to be and the story it wants to tell. Is it supposed to be a Sherlock Holmes caper, or a story about some kids who get roped into an unfamiliar world of magic? It also has the unfortunate effect of raising one's expectations of what could happen, or rather, what should happen. Without spoiling too much, but at this point I honestly don't care. I honestly thought that the main villain would be revealed as Professor Moriarty, getting revenge on Sherlock using supernatural means, but no. Again, by the finale, it seems that the show no longer needs too much reliance on the hook of Sherlock Holmes, but by that point, is it still able to escape the shadow of the world's greatest detective moving forward? I don't think so.
In all honesty, the show isn't perfect, but at the same time it's not terrible either. There are a lot of problems that could be fixed within the next season, if there is a second season altogether. I mean, there is the fact that the finale seems to have closed off all the story threads, and that there is no confirmation or announcement for a second season. Chances are looking pretty slim for new adventures of the gang. I don't know, I'd probably have to give this one 5 to 6 out of 10. I mean, it's still worth checking out, all things considered. Anyways, this has been Fuzz Face Reviews. Don't forget to leave a like, share, subscribe, and catch you later.